She stood at the edge of her own wedding feast and realized no one was looking at her. The grand hall of Thornwood Hall glittered with candlelight and crystal, 1,000 flames reflected in the polished floor. Music drifted through the air, soft and distant, as if it belonged to another world entirely. Alara Ashford, the new Duchess of Thornwood, held a glass of champagne she had not tasted and watched her husband's back as he crossed the room. He did not glance her way. He had not spoken to her since the ceremony, beyond the cold, dutiful words required at the altar. Now he stood with Lady Margaret Whitmore, a widow with hair like spun gold and a laugh that cut through every conversation. The Duke's head bent toward her, and for a brief, terrible moment, Alara saw something almost gentle in his expression, something she had never seen directed at her. The whispers began before the first course was even served. They say he was forced into the match. Her father's debts, I heard. He had no choice. Poor man, shackled to a girl with nothing but a ruined name. Alara's fingers tightened around the stem of her glass. She told herself it did not matter. She had known, when she agreed to this marriage, that love was not part of the arrangement. Her father's financial ruin had left her family on the edge of disgrace, and when the Duke of Thornwood offered for her hand, it had felt like a miracle. She had been foolish enough in those first hopeful days to believe she could build something real with him, that patience and kindness could warm even the coldest heart. She had not yet understood that his heart was not cold. It was simply closed to her. As the evening wore on, she moved through the crowd like a ghost. A few guests offered polite congratulations, but most eyes slid past her as if she were invisible. She caught fragments of conversations that fell silent when she drew near. Once, an elderly dowager looked her up and down and said, quite clearly, "She has no presence at all, does she? No wonder he prefers other company." Alara excused herself and walked toward the terrace doors, her cheeks burning, her breath shallow. She stepped outside into the cool night air and let the darkness wrap around her. From inside, she heard laughter. She did not turn to see whose it was. She had entered this marriage with hope, but hope, she was learning, was a fragile thing. It could not survive on silence and shadows. She did not cry, not yet. She simply stood very still and let the truth settle into her bones. This was not a beginning, it was a sentence. The first month at Thornwood Hall passed in a haze of quiet humiliation. Cassian Ashford, the Duke of Thornwood, was never cruel in his words. He did not shout or insult her. He simply did not see her. He took his meals alone, worked late in his study, and spoke to her only when absolutely necessary. When they were forced to appear together in public, he was distant but polite, the kind of courtesy one might offer a stranger on a train. Alara tried. She truly tried. She learned the rhythms of the household, memorized the names of every servant, and took over the duties of the lady of the manor without being asked. She planned a small dinner party to introduce herself to the local gentry, spending days on the menu and the seating arrangements. When she told the Duke about it, he looked up from his papers, his dark eyes unreadable, and said only, "Do as you wish." She had hoped he might attend. He did not. That night she sat at the head of a table filled with strangers and smiled until her face ached. Lady Margaret was among the guests, seated far too close to the Duke's empty chair. She spent the evening making veiled references to the Duke's long-standing affections and unfortunate obligations. Alara said nothing. She simply refilled her wine glass and listened to the sound of her own heart cracking. But still she clung to hope. There were moments, small and fleeting, that she collected like precious stones. The morning she found a new rose bush planted outside her private sitting room, a variety she had mentioned loving as a girl. The afternoon he asked, almost hesitantly, if she had settled in comfortably. The way his hand once brushed hers when they walked through the village together for a charity event, and he did not pull away immediately. She built fragile dreams on these crumbs. She told herself he was simply reserved, that his past had made him guarded, that in time he would soften. She believed love could grow in the quiet spaces between them. Then came the afternoon that shattered everything. She had been walking through the East Corridor, intending to bring him a book she thought he might enjoy when she heard voices from his study. The door was slightly ajar. She recognized Lady Margaret's voice first, smooth and honeyed, and then his, low and weary. "You must find this situation unbearable," Lady Margaret was saying. "Trapped in a marriage you never wanted, with a girl who clearly does not belong here." Ilara stopped breathing. "The marriage is a duty," Cashin replied, his voice flat. "Nothing more. I have no intention of pretending otherwise." "Does she know that?" "She will, in time. I intend to send her to the northern estate before the year is out. She can live there quietly, out of sight. It will be better for everyone." A soft laugh. "You are cold, Cashin." "No, I am simply practical. She was a burden I accepted. I will honor the agreement, but I will not give her more than that. She will never have my heart." Ilara did not remember walking away. She only knew that she found herself in her chambers, the book still clutched in her hands, her vision blurred. She had not realized a heart could break so quietly. There was no dramatic collapse, no sobbing. She simply sat on the edge of her bed and stared at the wall for a very long time. He intended to send her away, to bury her in the countryside like an unwanted piece of furniture. She was not even a disappointment to him. She was an inconvenience, a burden. The hope she had nurtured so carefully crumbled into dust. Something inside her shifted that day, something essential. She looked at the rose bush outside her window, the one she had believed was a sign of his hidden affection, and understood it had meant nothing. Perhaps the gardener had planted it on his own. Perhaps it had been a whim of the housekeeper. It did not matter. She would no longer build meaning out of empty gestures. She would stop waiting for love that was never going to come. The change was not immediate. It happened in small, almost imperceptible stages, like winter turning into spring. But those who paid close attention might have noticed the difference in the new Duchess. She stopped lingering in corridors, hopping to catch a glimpse of her husband. She stopped asking the servants what he liked for dinner, what time he would return, whether he had mentioned her. She stopped wearing the colors she thought he might prefer. She stopped holding her breath every time a door opened. Instead, she began to build a life of her own. Ilara had always been intelligent, but she had hidden it, fearing it would make her seem demanding. Now she let it bloom. She threw herself into the management of Thornwood Hall, discovering a keen aptitude for numbers and logistics. She reorganized the household accounts, finding efficiencies that saved the estate hundreds of pounds. She visited the tenant farms herself, listening to the workers' concerns and implementing small improvements that made their lives easier. She established a weekly market in the village, organized a lending library, and started a fund to help widows and orphans. The servants, who had initially viewed her with polite indifference, began to warm to her. They saw how she worked alongside them, sleeves rolled up, hands covered in soil as she helped plant a new kitchen garden. They saw that she remembered their names, asked after their children, and never raised her voice in anger. Within a few months, the staff adored her. The village, too, came to love their new duchess. They had expected a cold aristocrat. Instead, they found a woman who sat with their elderly, read to their children, and listened to their troubles as if they mattered. She did not just donate money. She gave her time, her attention, her genuine care. And slowly, something remarkable happened. Ilara began to feel alive again, not because of her husband, because of herself. She discovered she could be useful, respected, even beloved without his approval. She found purpose in service and confidence in her own abilities. The timid girl who had stood invisible at her own wedding feast was being replaced by a woman of quiet strength. Cashin Ashford noticed none of this at first. He was too absorbed in his own affairs, too accustomed to her absence. But there came an evening when he looked up from his desk and realized he had not seen his wife in 3 days. He had taken his meals in his study, as always, and she had not interrupted him once. She had not left a note. She had not sent a servant to inquire about his health. He found this mildly unsettling. He dismissed it. She was probably sulking somewhere, nursing some imagined slight. Women did that. It would pass. Then he began to hear her name. It came up at a dinner with his peers. Lord Ashby mentioned, quite casually, that his tenants had been speaking highly of the Duchess. "She's done wonders with the irrigation system," he said, sounding genuinely impressed. "My steward tells me your wife practically redesigned the drainage on the East Fields herself." Cashin frowned. He had not known she was doing anything with the fields. A few days later, he overheard two footmen talking in the hall. "The Duchess sent medicine to my mother," one said. "She didn't even tell anyone, just arranged it quietly." "Aye," the other replied. "She's proper kind, not like some in this house." Cashin felt a strange, hollow sensation in his chest. He pushed it aside. It was good that she was keeping busy, he told himself. It would make the eventual separation easier. But the sensation did not go away. It grew. The true turning point arrived with a man named Julian Ashby. Julian was the new estate steward, a young man with an easy smile, kind eyes, and a genuine passion for agricultural reform. He had been hired on the recommendation of a neighboring landowner, and from his first week at Thornwood, he treated Alara with a respect that bordered on reverence. He sought her opinions, valued her ideas, and never once looked at her as if she were invisible. They worked together often, walking the estate boundaries, discussing crop rotations, planning the new orchard. Julian listened to her as if every word she spoke mattered. He laughed at her quiet jokes, brought her books he thought she might enjoy, and once, when she stumbled on an uneven path, he caught her elbow and steadied her with a gentleness that made her breath catch. It was nothing, she told herself, a steward doing his job, but she could not deny the warmth that spread through her chest when he was near. She had been starved of kindness for so long that even a simple smile felt like a feast. Cashin saw them together one afternoon from his study window. Alara was laughing at something Julian had said, her face tilted toward the sun, her expression open and unguarded in a way he had never seen before. The steward stood close to her, too close, his hand resting on the trunk of a tree just inches from her shoulder. There was an intimacy in their posture that made something hot and sharp twist in Cashin's gut. He told himself it was irritation. A steward should not be so familiar with his duchess. It was a matter of propriety, nothing more. But when he saw them together a second time, and a third, the sharpness did not fade. It deepened. It became a gnawing ache that kept him awake at night. He began to watch her. He noticed things he had never seen before. The way she moved through a room with a quiet grace that commanded attention without demanding it. The way the servants' faces lit up when she spoke to them. The way she had stopped waiting for him at dinner, stopped looking toward the door with that hopeful, heartbreaking expression she used to wear. She no longer sought his presence. She no longer sought his approval. She had built a world that did not include him, and she seemed perfectly content within it. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He had wanted her to stop clinging to him. He had wished for it. But now that she had, he felt a loss so profound it terrified him. He missed her tentative smiles, her nervous attempts at conversation, the way she used to leave small posies of flowers on his desk. She had stopped doing all of that. She had stopped, and he had not even noticed when it began. He had pushed her away and she had gone. Not physically, not yet, but in every way that mattered. And the worst part was she did not seem angry, she did not seem bitter, she simply seemed indifferent, as if he were a piece of furniture she had learned to live without. When they passed in the hallway, she offered a polite nod. When he asked a question, she answered briefly and moved on. There was no coldness in her tone, no resentment. There was simply nothing. He had always believed her love was a burden. Now he understood it had been a gift, and he had thrown it away. The jealousy came next, hot and irrational. He found himself bristling whenever Julian was mentioned. He began timing his walks to coincide with theirs, inserting himself into conversations, making sharp comments about the steward's work that were entirely unwarranted. Julian, to his credit, remained unfailingly polite, but Alara's eyes would go cool whenever Cashin spoke, and she would find an excuse to leave within minutes. One evening, at a small gathering of local landowners, Cashin saw Julian offer Alara his arm as they walked into dinner. She took it with an ease that suggested it was not the first time. Something inside Cashin snapped. He crossed the room, positioned himself beside her, and said in a low voice, "I need to speak with you." She looked up at him, and for the first time he saw no trace of the old longing in her eyes, just polite curiosity. "Of course. Shall we step aside?" He led her to a quiet corner, his heart pounding. He did not know what he intended to say. He only knew he could not bear to see her on another man's arm. "You and the steward," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. "You are close." Alara tilted her head. "He is a colleague and a friend. Is there something improper in that?" "People will talk." "People have always talked," she said quietly. "I learned long ago that their words cannot hurt me unless I let them." She held his gaze. "Is that all, Your Grace?" The formal address stung like a slap. She had not called him by his title in months, not in private. He realized with a sinking heart that she was drawing a line. He was no longer Cashin to her. He was the Duke of Thornwood, a stranger with a shared name. "No," he said, grasping for something, anything to keep her there. I wondered if you needed anything for your projects, the village, the estate." She looked almost amused. "That is kind of you, but I have everything I need. The steward has been most helpful in sourcing materials and labor. You need not trouble yourself." "Everything I need." The words echoed in his mind long after she walked away. She had everything she needed, and none of it included him. That night, Cashin sat alone in his study, a glass of brandy untouched on his desk. The fire had burned low, casting long shadows across the walls. He stared at the empty chair where she used to sit, the one she had occupied so hopefully in those early weeks, waiting for a conversation he had never been willing to give. He remembered her face as she had been then, eager, nervous, full of a love she had not yet learned to hide. He remembered the small things she had done, the flowers on his desk, the books she had set out for him, the careful way she had arranged his papers. He had dismissed them as desperate attempts to win his favor. He had not seen them for what they truly were. Gifts, pure and unguarded gifts of affection, offered without condition. And he had trampled them. A strange, burning pressure built behind his eyes. He pressed his fingers against his temples, trying to push it away. But the memories kept coming. The way she had looked at him on their wedding day, so hopeful, so full of fragile trust. The way she had wilted under his indifference, week by week, until the light in her eyes had gone out. The way she had stopped trying, stopped waiting, stopped caring. He had done that. He had taken a woman who was willing to love him and had crushed that willingness beneath his heel. For the first time, he allowed himself to feel the full weight of his regret. It was not a fleeting pang of guilt. It was a tidal wave. It crashed over him, pulling him under, filling his lungs with the bitter taste of his own failure. He had been given a treasure, and he had treated it like refuse. He had been so determined to protect his own heart that he had shattered hers instead. And now she was gone, not in body but in spirit. She had found purpose, friendship, and meaning in a life that did not revolve around him. And somewhere in the midst of that discovery, she had stopped needing him. He did not sleep that night. He sat in the darkness, the brandy untouched, and faced the terrifying truth he had been running from for months. He did not want to send her away. He had never truly wanted to send her away. The words he had spoken to Lady Margaret had been a performance, a desperate act meant to satisfy the ears of someone who watched his every move. But the performance had cost him everything. He was in love with his wife. He had been in love with her perhaps from the very beginning, from the moment she had looked up at him with those earnest, frightened eyes and promised to be a good duchess. He had buried that love so deeply, convinced himself it was duty or pity or obligation, because acknowledging it would have made him vulnerable. And vulnerability, he had learned long ago, was a weakness he could not afford. But looking back now, he understood that the weakness was not in loving her. The weakness was in being too afraid to show it. And now it might be too late. The fear of loss did not arrive gradually. It seized him in a single, horrifying moment that turned his entire world to ash. It happened on a gray afternoon in late autumn. A fire broke out in the greenhouse where Ilara had been nurturing seedlings for the village's winter food supply. The old wooden structure caught quickly, flames devouring the dry timber and glass. By the time the alarm was raised, the building was an inferno. Cashin heard the shouting from his study. He ran toward the commotion, his heart already pounding with a dread he could not name. When he reached the gardens and saw the greenhouse engulfed in flames, he stopped cold. "The Duchess," someone screamed. "The Duchess is inside." The world narrowed to a single point of terror. He did not think. He did not hesitate. He plunged toward the burning building, ignoring the hands that tried to hold him back. The heat hit him like a wall, searing his skin, filling his lungs with smoke. He could hear nothing but the roar of the fire and the frantic pounding of his own heart. He found her near the back wall, coughing and disoriented, her dress already singed. She was trying to drag a heavy tray of seedlings toward the door, as if she could not bear to leave them behind. In that moment, Cashin understood something fundamental about his wife. Even in the face of death, she was thinking of others. Even now, she was trying to save something that would feed the hungry. He reached her in 3 strides. He seized her arm, pulling her against him, and she looked up with wide, terrified eyes. For a single heartbeat, he saw recognition flash across her face, and then something else. Confusion, as if she could not understand why he was there. "I've got you," he shouted over the roar of the flames. "Hold on to me." She did not argue. She was too weak, too dazed. He lifted her into his arms and carried her out through the collapsing doorway, shielding her body with his own as burning debris rained down around them. The moment they were clear, he fell to his knees in the grass, still cradling her against his chest. She was alive. She was alive. The words repeated in his mind like a prayer. He looked down at her face, smudged with soot, her eyes closed, her breath shallow, and something inside him broke wide open. "Ilara," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Ilara, stay with me, please." Her eyelids fluttered. She looked up at him, and for the first time in months her gaze was not distant or guarded. It was simply exhausted. She lifted a trembling hand and touched his cheek, her fingers coming away black with soot. "You came for me," she breathed. "Why?" The question undid him. Why? As if she truly believed he might have let her burn, as if she could not conceive of a world in which her life mattered to him. He could not speak. He could only hold her, his body shaking, his face buried in her hair. The crowd of servants and villagers who had gathered stood in stunned silence, watching the cold Duke weep over his wife like a man who had just been given back his soul. The days that followed were strange and fragile. Ilara recovered slowly, confined to her chambers by the doctor's orders. The burns on her arms were minor, but the smoke had damaged her lungs and she needed rest. She slept a great deal, and when she woke, she often found Cashin there. He had not left her side for more than a few hours at a time. He sat in the chair by her window, reading quietly or simply watching the light move across the floor. He did not speak much, but his presence was constant, a silent vigil that confused her more than any words could have. She did not understand this new version of him, this man who brought her tea with his own hands, who adjusted her pillows with a tenderness she had never seen, who looked at her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. She was too tired to question it. She simply accepted the strangeness and let herself be cared for. But one evening, as the last light of sunset painted the room in shades of rose and gold, she finally found the strength to ask, "Why are you doing this?" He looked up from the book he had not been reading. His face was thinner than it had been, she realized. There were shadows under his eyes and a new tightness around his mouth. "Because I thought I had lost you," he said quietly, "and the thought destroyed me." She searched his face for the coldness she knew so well, but it was not there. In its place was something raw, something unguarded. She did not know what to do with it. "You were going to send me away," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "To the northern estate. I heard you say it." He closed his eyes. A long, slow breath escaped him. "I know you did. I have known for some time, and I have hated myself for it every day since." She waited, her heart beating too fast. "That conversation," he said, "was not meant for your ears, but that does not excuse it. I said those things because I believed there was a threat, a very real threat to anyone who became important to me. I believed that if I appeared indifferent to you, if I pushed you away, you would be safe." She frowned. "A threat? What threat?" He rose from the chair and crossed to the window, his back to her. "Before I married you, I made powerful enemies. One in particular, a man who would stop at nothing to destroy anything I held dear. When our marriage was arranged, I received a message, a warning. If I showed you any affection, any regard, you would become a target." Ilara's breath caught. She remembered the rumors she had heard, whispers of old political feuds, of dark secrets buried in the Duke's past. She had never imagined they could touch her. "I thought I was protecting you," he continued, his voice low and strained. "I thought if I kept you at a distance, if I made the world believe you meant nothing to me, you would be safe from him. I told myself it was the noble thing to do, the sacrifice a man makes for duty." He turned to face her, and the anguish in his eyes stole her voice. "But it was not noble. It was cowardly. I should have trusted you. I should have told you the truth. Instead, I let you believe you were unloved. I let you wither in silence while I played the part of a cold, indifferent husband. And by the time I understood the depth of what I had done, you had already stopped caring." She stared at him, her mind reeling. All those months of loneliness, of silent humiliation, of whispered cruelty, all of it had been a performance, a shield. He had pushed her away not because he despised her, but because he was trying to protect her from a danger she had never known existed. It should have made her feel better. Instead, it made her feel hollow. "You let me believe I was nothing to you," she said slowly. "You let me break day after day, believing I was unwanted. You let me stop loving you because I thought there was nothing left to love." "I know," his voice cracked. "I know, and I will spend the rest of my life regretting it." She looked at him for a long moment. The man who had seemed so untouchable, so distant, was now standing before her with his heart in his hands, waiting for a judgment she did not know how to give. She saw the guilt in his eyes, the fear, the desperate, flickering hope. And she saw something else too, love, real and raw and terrified, but undeniably there. "I don't know how to feel," she whispered. "I don't know what is true." He crossed the room and knelt beside her bed, a gesture so unexpected that she flinched. The Duke of Thornwood, a man who had never bent for anyone, knelt at her bedside like a supplicant. "Then let me tell you the truth now," he said. "Every word of it. I have loved you since the first moment I saw you, standing in your father's garden with dirt on your hands and sunlight in your hair. I loved you when I placed that ring on your finger, and I loved you every day after, even when I was too afraid to show it. I have been a fool and a coward, and I have hurt you in ways I can never undo. But I am asking you, begging you to let me try." She felt the tears come at last, hot and silent, sliding down her cheeks. She had thought she was done crying over this man, but these were not tears of grief. They were tears of release, of a pain finally acknowledged, of a wound finally being cleaned. "I don't know if I can trust you," she said. "I don't know if I can love you again." "I know." He took her hand, his grip gentle but steady. "I am not asking for your love, not yet. I am asking for a chance to earn it, a chance to show you who I truly am without the masks and the fear. If you give me that, I will spend every day of my life proving that you are the most precious thing in my world." She looked down at their joined hands. His fingers were trembling. She had never seen him tremble before. A small, fragile seed of hope stirred in her chest. She was not ready to trust it. She was not ready to call it love, but she was willing, perhaps, to let it grow. "Tell me everything," she said. "From the beginning, leave nothing out." And he did. He told her about Lord Strickland, the man who had once been his closest friend and had become his most bitter enemy. He told her about the threats that had arrived in the weeks before their wedding, the veiled promises of violence against anyone Cashin dared to love. He told her about the spy he had suspected was planted in his own household, a servant who reported his every move. Every cold word, every public indifference, every moment of distance had been carefully crafted to convince that spy that the Duchess meant nothing to him. He told her about the steward, Julian, how he had not been hired by a neighbor but by Cashin himself, in secret, to watch over her. Julian was not a threat. He was a guardian, a man Cashin trusted to keep her safe when he could not be seen doing so himself. Every kindness Julian had shown her had been at Cashin's request, orchestrated from the shadows by a man who was too afraid to show his own face. Alara listened to all of it, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. The rose bush outside her window, the repairs to the village irrigation, the medicine for the footman's mother, all of it had come from him. He had been loving her in secret all along, too afraid to let her see. When he finished, the silence between them was not heavy. It was expectant, like the pause between a question and an answer. "I need time," she said at last. "I need to learn who you truly are, not the cold duke, not the distant stranger, the man who planted roses for me and was too afraid to tell me why." "I will give you all the time in the world," he said. "I will wait as long as you need. I will prove myself in deeds, not words. I will show you every day that my heart belongs to you. It always has." She looked into his dark eyes and saw, for the first time, the man she had hoped he could be. The man she had believed in before the world had taught her not to believe. It was not forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. And sometimes a beginning was enough. Weeks passed. The spy was discovered, a quiet maid who had been in Strickland's employ for years. With the evidence in hand, Cashin was able to bring his enemy to justice, dismantling the threat that had hung over their marriage like a shadow. The danger was gone. The fear was gone. What remained was something new and fragile and terrifyingly beautiful. They learned each other slowly. He brought her tea in the mornings and sat with her while she read. She began to ask him questions about his work, his past, his dreams. They walked together in the gardens, not out of obligation but out of a genuine desire for each other's company. He learned to laugh, and she learned to trust the sound. One evening, as they stood on the terrace watching the sun sink behind the hills, she turned to him and said, "I think I am beginning to know you." He looked down at her, hope flickering in his eyes. "And what do you think of the man you are discovering?" She smiled, a real smile, the kind that reached her eyes. "I think he is worth knowing." He reached for her hand, and this time she did not pull away. She laced her fingers through his and held on. They stood together in the fading light, two people who had nearly lost each other, beginning again. And in the quiet of that twilight, Alara felt something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt hope, real, unshakable hope. Not because of promises or grand gestures, but because of a man who had finally learned to be brave enough to love her aloud. She leaned her head against his shoulder and closed her eyes. The past was not forgotten. The wounds were not fully healed, but they were walking forward, side by side, into a future they would build together. And that was more than she had ever dared to dream.